Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on worker voice. We're going to give it just about a minute or two just to let people into the room. But in the meantime, if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat, where you're calling from, feel free to do so. And I'll repeat this message like one or two more times and then we'll get started. But welcome. Welcome, everyone. For those of you just joining, we're going to get started in about a minute or two. We're just waiting for the room to fill in. The chat is open, so feel free to introduce yourselves, share where you're calling from. And I think I'll give it about one more minute and then we'll get started. Welcome, welcome. For those of you just joining, we're sharing in the chat where we're calling from. Okay, someone from San Jose, Ontario. Welcome, everyone. Cool. So we'll go ahead and get started. So yeah, welcome everyone to our webinar on worker voice, how tech workers are speaking up at work and beyond. My name is Herman Calderon. I'm Tech Equity Senior Manager of Community Outreach and Engagement. And also here from our team is Tim Newman. He's Tech Equity's SVP for Labor Programs. And we're excited to be here with you all today. And we're really honored to be joined by some amazing panelists. But before we get into that, I did want to share a little bit about tech equity for those of you that are new to a tech equity event or just our organization in general. I promise I'll keep it brief so that I don't take all the spotlight away from our panelists. But Tech Equity is a nonprofit organization that was started in California, and we work to ensure that the tech industry's growth benefits everyone. And we focus on economic equity, where tech meets housing and labor. We're a hybrid organization that's combining research and advocacy, creating policy and implementation that's informed by the experiences of what we're hearing from workers and from renters. And we hold the tech industry accountable to ensure that its products and practices can do good rather than harm. And at Tech Equity, we raise public consciousness about emerging areas where tech companies create economic inequities. We articulate and advocate for regulation and adoption of industry-wide standards to address the harms and opportunities we identify, and we support implementation and enforcement of these regulatory agendas and industry standards. So I'm sure that's like a mouthful, and that was probably a lot of jargon. Apologies, but you can check us out at techequity.us for more information on our mission, a little bit about the work that we do, and some really cool research just as an example that our labor team does. So yeah, techequity.us for more information on that. Um, so yeah, once again, thank you all for being here today. We just wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping. So we hope that no matter what your experience is or what motivated you to join the webinar today, that you leave this session with information that is useful to you, that you feel motivated to stand up for yourself, your coworkers, that you're able to help build community and share resources. So yeah, and just to help us create that space of inclusivity, that space of learning, we do enforce a code of conduct. So my colleague Tim is going to be dropping that link into the chat. Really, all it's saying is to just be, respectful, be nice to one another. We just really want to foster, yeah, like I said, a healthy discussion and hopefully breed some of that curiosity and, like I said, resource sharing for each and every one of you. That the code of conduct can also be found at the bottom of our website. Once again, techequity.us. And for this session, we are recording the panelist presentation for you to share any of that information out with your colleagues, with your community, with other coworkers. We will pause the recording once we hit the Q&A portion of the discussion. So yeah, with that being said, we'll hand it over to Tim from our team, who's going to be introducing the panelists today and leading the discussion, and then I'll hop off and hop back on for Q&A. So Tim, you can take it away.
Awesome. Great. Well, we're very excited for this conversation today. We got three great people that you'll be hearing from throughout the conversation. We've got Lisa Kresge, who's a senior researcher in the Technology and Work program at UC Berkeley Labor Center. We'll be talking about her research on union contracts related to technology. Talia Kirk, who will talk about her work organizing with her coworkers at Accenture, working for Google Help, and as a member of the Alphabet Workers Union. And Varun, oh no, oh no, I'm gonna, you just told me how to pronounce it correctly, and now I'm gonna mess it up. But Varun, we're very excited to have you from Amazon Voice for Climate Justice, about the campaigns and work that you've been doing around AI as well. So thank you all for being here. And just before we jump in, I just wanted to acknowledge that, we're in a really challenging time, a really difficult moment for all of us right now. And I think tech worker organizing is, an important topic. Tech workers are increasingly organizing and speaking out right now about how their companies are responding to ICE, along with many other issues. So we hope that this conversation will highlight the ways in which workers are building power in their workplaces and hopefully inspire more folks to get involved in organizing. And I just believe that we are more powerful together when we take collective action every day. So thank you all for being here and your time and for what you do. And, I do not take it lightly, and I really appreciate you being with us today. So I'm going to start off with a few specific questions for each of you, and then we'll just like jump into more of a discussion. And as a reminder, please do, for folks listening, do use the Q&A function to share any questions that you have for us or ideas that you'd like to discuss. And of course, I will also remind you that nothing here is legal advice, of course. So please keep that in mind. So to kick us off, Talia, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. Could you just describe a little bit about like the work that you do in the tech industry in your role?
Yeah, so as you said, I work for a company called Accenture, but on my team, our only client that we work with, and we've worked with them for about 7 years now, is Google. In fact, like our relationship is so close that we even like filed for joint employer, and are currently winning that, right? So because like we're just so enmeshed with Google that it sometimes feels like we are Googlers ourselves. So basically. I work with the team of technical writers who who write the Google Help Center, right? So if you type into your phone like, "Hey, how do I fix my Pixel?" or like YouTube anything, right? Like that's the type of stuff we write. And I am their corporate trainer, which is very useful for organizing because nobody gets through that door as a new hire without spending about 3 weeks with me, kind of getting to build that trust and really getting to know each other and, hearing a little bit about union stuff.
Awesome. And yeah, what are some of the issues that did inspire you to start organizing with your coworkers?
Yeah, so I think a big one was just like everyone's top issue on our team was like job security, right? We love this job so much despite the drama that we always have. And so one of the big things was like remote work, because, we just couldn't perform as well. When, if we had to go into the office and, they don't provide like the like equipment that you need, right? Like our jobs are really complicated. You need like multiple monitors and an external keyboard and mouse to do it all. And like, they don't give that to you when you go to the office. And so yeah, it was just really important. Also, some of us we moved during the pandemic, and so like if you told us to go to an office, we literally couldn't, and we'd have to quit. So we really that was one of our big issues that Accenture before we unionized, they wouldn't commit. They just wanted to make it very wishy-washy, like, oh, we can change our minds at any time. And that's one of the big things that we want in our contract was permanent remote work, which was a huge, relief for everybody.
Awesome. And yeah, actually you're hitting on this, which is you are one of the units within Alphabet Workers Union that has a contract, a collective bargaining agreement with the employer. What were some of the other priorities that you had going into bargaining or things that you wanted to address through the contract as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, job security just kept on being the thing. Like we dealt with some really brutal layoffs during our organizing days. Like 75% of our team was laid off. And so what everybody that was left kept on telling me was, I just want to know that this job is going to be here. And of course, we can't make our employer promise that, but what we can do is we can make it hurt if they do decide to lay us off. So we managed, right, in addition to the permanent remote work, we got 6 weeks of severance pay, which is just like a huge
Wow.
relief to everybody, knowing that there's a bit of a safety net in case the worst does happen. From more of a tech perspective, one of the big things is we were able to get a tools committee, which meets quarterly with our managers, and that is our space to be able to like point out all of the things that are wrong with all of these AI tools that they keep on trying to like shove down our throats. And it's a time, normally our managers wouldn't have any insight, they just don't pay close enough attention to know that, like, hey, these tools for the most part are making everything take longer, and there's just, and it's not improving anybody's, the work. It's not improving it. And so this has been it's been really important to be able to show them, like, and make them focus on the fact that, like, we have to do better. If they want to do AI, we got to do it better than this.
Hmm. For sure, yeah. Um, I think I'm sure you have many tips and recommendations for folks. Obviously, like, a lot of folks in the tech industry are kind of new to workplace organizing. What are some recommendations or tips that you would have for people who are feeling like they want to improve things in their workplace and your industry and are trying to figure out where to begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a bit of like a Cinderella story because we were able to organize during the Biden administration when, we had a very strong NLRB. And so that really made a big difference to us being able to be successful. And I think we all have to just acknowledge that that is not the world that we live in right now. And so that makes there's just a lot more risks to organizing. And so I would really advise folks to, you know, as much as possible, go in cautiously and maybe a little stealthily, because, that will help kind of like prevent some of the more harsh retaliation that you might get. And really just like focus on building your community. This is the best time. That is the foundation of every good union and organizing is just like building the trust and relationships between your coworkers. So like you don't have to feel pressured to brand things as like this is a union thing. Like you can, but at the same time, like think about the people that you're working with first. And I would really just encourage, like, you know, just do whatever is practically helping each other, right? Like, I always say make like a space, like a meeting weekly or a chat group where you can be like, okay, what do people need help with? And like prove to each other that you are going to help each other fix the problems at your workplace. And that doesn't have to be something that's controversial, like it can be, you're just making things better for each other in a way that hopefully, I mean, again, maybe this is too rosy, but a lot of times your managers will actually appreciate that you guys are kind of doing their jobs for them.
That's a very interesting plus side to organizing that. Yeah, people should keep in mind for sure. Also, just in case, NLRB stands for National Labor Relations Board, if anyone's not familiar, so definitely look that up. And tell you one last question is, I think you've outlined a lot of the important improvements that you've either won or like put into contract language through your organizing, but is there anything else that you see as like a major benefit of organizing with your coworkers that hasn't been mentioned, or even just like on a personal level, or beyond just like some of the contract language that you want?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is everyone's story who organizes by far, but I've just been really shocked that we went from a team that had tons of drama all the time, and it just felt like everything was like insecure and unstable and like scary, and just like every single day there was something on fire. And listen, things are not perfect by any means, but this is the calmest year that we've ever had. And
Mhm.
it's just like, I think a lot of that is because our managers like have a bit of a grudging respect of us. And like, sometimes they'll try to roll out some crazy, like weird AI pilot. And the second that we go, hey, we'd like to talk to you about that. They go, you know what? Actually, we're going to make an exception for you guys. This is just going to be our folks that work in India and the Philippines. You guys, this is optional for you. And we're like, okay, I mean, we weren't actually going to ask for an exception, but hey, if you want to like make our lives easier, why not? Again, that's not everybody's story in organizing, but it's really been amazing just like how it's not just about the stuff in the contract. It's about sort of like just the vibe has really changed for the better around here.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear always. And since you were talking about the ways that AI shows up in the workplace, Varun, I'd love to turn to you and hear a little bit about how did you get involved with Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, and could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, great to hear from you, Talia. And yeah, excited to keep talking about this stuff. So I got involved with AECJ through a campaign that the org was running back when Amazon forced everyone to return to office. So this was back in spring 2023. Um, at the time, I was feeling really upset about that policy in particular. But I also had many years of sort of this cognitive dissonance build up about working at Amazon. Like I was concerned about Amazon's negative climate impact, its treatment of warehouse workers, the negative impacts it has in the communities where its facilities are. And I was involved with a lot of stuff outside of work, but it didn't do a lot to make me feel better about working at Amazon. So Amazon Employees for Climate Justice actually found me through some internal outreach they were doing about that return to office campaign, and that's how I got involved. And I mean, I feel like making change at Amazon is something that employees are uniquely suited to do. And since Amazon is such a big company, like what we do at Amazon has impacts in the broader industry, in the community, right? Amazon is everywhere.
Mhm.
And I feel like that unique position and that power that we can have at Amazon is why I've been organizing since then.
That's amazing. Love to hear it. And one of the things that I've seen that you all have been really active on recently is this open letter that you put out about AI. I was wondering if you could talk more about that recent effort and what's been going on lately with the organizing work.
Yeah, so the open letter campaign is the result of like a multi-year effort of talking to coworkers. So at the beginning of last year, when we were talking to our coworkers, the AI push was just beginning. Management was talking about how we needed to do AI. I mean, it had been coming for a bit now, but that was also when the data center fights were heating up all around the country. When we were thinking about the campaign as AECJ, we weren't sure if AI would be the thing that would, sort of galvanize the most workers in the moment. That's what we were trying to do. Get more people excited, have them be seen in the campaign, have the campaign speak to like what they want and what they think needs to happen. Um, but AI just kept coming up in our conversations, how it was impacting people at work, how it was impacting the way leadership made decisions, like general fears about how AI was impacting the world. Um, and when thinking about the campaign, like again, we wanted to send a message like beyond just Amazon. We're in coalition with logistics workers, other groups around the country that are trying to make change in the labor and climate justice space. So, we felt like, okay, tech workers at Amazon and tech workers in general can be leaders in the AI fight, and we need to put out a vision that says that tech workers are paying attention to this stuff. It's impacting us, and we know it's impacting the world. So let's like make a clear stance and try to bring that to people's attention and get people on board with that as a way to move people into action.
That's awesome. And yeah, I'm curious, you talked a little bit about the ways that AI has been impacting you and your coworkers like day to day, but I was wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share about like what that experience has been like, how it might be changing your work or things like that.
Yeah, so AI has like totally changed the way decisions are made. Like obviously at a company like Amazon, it's very top down. The leadership at the top decides what happens and we all just get this stuff pushed on us, kind of like Talia was talking about, just like with different okay, use this tool. Like managers are now being like graded on their team's adoption of AI tools. So that's all being tracked. All these metrics are being tracked on a per employee, per team level, and it's being rolled up to the org. So like your org level manager has to now be accountable for how the people under them are using AI. So there's a ton of initiatives to boost AI usage in ways that don't actually make the work easier or more effective. We've had so many problems with like people pushing really broken stuff that was written by AI. Another big thing is changes in work expectations. So we're expected to do more with the same or fewer people. A lot of teams have been on hiring freeze for years now. So we're not getting more people. People are leaving, and because of AI, they're like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll be able to do the same amount of work, if not more."
Mhm.
And I think for me personally, the biggest thing is like in my experience at Amazon, there have been explicit connections between AI usage and headcount reduction. So like we attended meetings where like our department head explicitly told us that the folks who are coworkers who are sitting in other countries who are different doing different kinds of work than us, like we are implementing AI tools that will lead to them losing their jobs. It's just dressed up in a different kind of language.
Mhm. Well, yeah, on that note, I think one of the things that really stands out and is so impressive with the open letter is the way that it talks about how this impacts people across such a really broad company, as you said, who are doing such different roles, and the broader community impact of this as well. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about like why that kind of like broad, inclusive sort of agenda across different work divisions was important in drafting the letter and like what that's meant for your organizing as well.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things there. One, like this more intersectional approach has been pretty core to our group since it started. Like this group started originally around the ideas of climate justice, which is very intersectional. And we have been in coalition with folks in the logistics space, so Amazon warehouse workers, drivers. We're in coalition with community groups who represent people who are being impacted by Amazon's logistical facilities, like in Southern California, for example. Um, and they have really shaped, like our work with them has really shaped the way we see how connected like tech workers are to the rest of the world. And it's also strategic because Amazon really wants to separate tech workers from other kinds of workers. They want to separate tech workers from the communities that are facing their impacts. And that serves Amazon to help it helps them because we're like isolated in this silo where we don't consider our connection to all those places. And it always has seemed like a risk, but it's also proven itself over and over again as like so valuable. And in the case of this campaign, like so many of the people that we've spoken to who for whom the open letter has really resonated are people who like care about their life outside of work, for lack of a better way to say it, right? Like tech workers are deeply embedded in their communities. They're seeing what's going on in the world, and the people who are most excited about the letter and the people who we're excited to like bring into the work, they're telling us how like we're so glad that you're talking about all these other things that are happening in my life because this gives me a way to bring those issues to my work to talk to my coworkers. And we can
Mhm.
like be more personal, we can speak to like what's really going on in our lives, and the letter like gives us language to do that.
That's awesome. Okay, and then wrapping up this section, is I'm sure you also have many recommendations for folks, but any tips or insight that you would share for people who might be at the beginning of this kind of workplace organizing journey?
Yeah, I really want to just echo what Talia said about relationships being the heart of organizing. We've tried so many different approaches of
Mm,
like, okay, what's it going to take to get our coworkers to be excited and to commit themselves to this work? Um, and what we've learned through that is like, it's really about trust and that like personal relationship that we can build with each other. And that's what, enables people to take more risk and enables people to like kind of deal with the scary aspects of this. Especially at Amazon, especially at big companies, the companies want us to feel alone. And I think it's
mhm.
fair to say a lot of the ways that they operate, a lot of their systems are intended to create that division or make it hard to speak up. And a lot of us are in precarious positions. Like, there's a lot of folks who are on visa right now. That's a really, really scary place to be. Um, and when thinking about organizing, like it is really amazing and exciting to think about, okay, we're gonna win. We can get these demands, we can get these concessions. I think like winning also looks like feeling more comfortable at work. Winning also looks like having that relationship with your coworkers where you can trust them, where you can, be together and like carry some of what you're experiencing like in a shared way. So yeah, just talk to people, try to like bring them out of their shell and do the same for yourself if you can.
That's awesome. Great advice. I'd love to hear it. Lisa, I'd love to turn to you for that. You have been doing such really cool and important work analyzing hundreds of union contracts to examine how workers are negotiating their technology rights at work through the negotiating tech inventory. And we will definitely share a link to that for folks to check out. It's really cool stuff. But I'm curious, like, what are some of the themes that you've identified in your research that workers are already winning through their union contracts?
Right. Thanks, Tim. And thank you, Tim and Herman and Tech Equity for inviting me to speak today. It's such a pleasure to be on a panel with such fierce warriors in the industry. As Tim mentioned, I've been doing research and just recently published a inventory of tech bargaining provisions, if you will, that are in contracts. And I've been doing this research actually since we started our program in 2018. This is a revisit of that research. And if you look across all of the contracts, there's really three buckets of provisions that are in the contracts that relate to technology. And I'm talking about technology in general, not just AI. The first bucket is really focused on decision-making power and governance. So that's really the foundational rights. You can think of that as process rights, foundational rights to notice, advance notice to bargaining and to participation so that workers and unions have a role in actual technology decisions rather than just unilateral management control. The second bucket really focuses on worker protections and employer obligations. So when an employer is adopting a technology and it has effects on the organization of work or on workers, these really outline, these provisions really focus on what are the rights that workers have. So for example, job security, pay security, training, rules around the use of their data, rules around discipline. So those are really protections and agreements that employers are making in advance when they are planning to introduce new technologies. And then the third group really focuses on the technologies themselves. So how the technologies are going to be used and integrated in terms of the day-to-day interactions that workers will have with those technologies. So really setting limits on clarifying how tasks are assigned, or setting limits on how pace is set, or the use of the technology to determine workplace standards, or rules around worker judgment and how that is exercised if they have a decision support system, for example. And it's really looking at where accountability ultimately sits and providing guardrails and protections for workers as they work with technologies. And I guess, the big takeaway, if you look across all these contracts, is that really it's not just unions responding after the fact. It's really unions taking a very proactive stance on shaping how technology is governed and how work is structured in digital workplaces.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. And I know that this is kind of like an update. Also, you've been in this for a long time. You've been researching these and closely examining them. Do you have any like thoughts on what's changed over the years, if anything, on what's
Right.
getting covered? Yeah.
Yeah. So unions have been negotiating around technology for decades,
Mhm.
mechanization agreements, assembly lines, etc. And so a lot of those agreements are basically like new technology agreements, and they outline sort of the foundational rights as well as effects bargaining often around replacement and displacement. At this point, if the contracts all include those important provisions as our foundational rights, but we're seeing more negotiations around working with technology, that third bucket that I was talking about the guardrails around specific technologies. Sort of related to that is the earlier contracts really would have new technology agreements that were sort of general in terms. So it was about technological change, and it wasn't very specific about the actual technologies that they were negotiating around. You see a lot more technology-specific provisions, like the AI provisions that you've seen in the Hollywood industries, the creative industries, the news guild, and increasingly in the tech industry. And I will say that there is an exception to that. There have been electronic monitoring and surveillance provisions since the 1980s, since
Hmm.
the introduction of computers into the workplace, as well as surveillance cameras. And so there's some long-standing agreements around those specific technologies, and we're seeing those increase as well. Also, we're seeing sort of an interesting transition of existing agreements. So have been longstanding agreements on workers' rights around their personnel files, for example. And those are sort of transitioning into more of a data rights approach and cybersecurity safeguards. So that is
Hmm.
one approach that you see with unions, is that they're sort of adapting the existing provisions to update to the more digital workplace. But
Hmm.
again, the contracts are really remarkably consistent in the sense that they're really addressing those foundational rights. And I think that, and just as much as they did in assembly lines, and the same with AI at this point.
Awesome. And yeah, I mean, it's a great thing that more and more workers are getting these protections through being unionized through these contracts. Do you could you say more about kind of like what differentiates between like an average worker who is not covered by these contracts and like where's the gap between the protections that would exist for a non-unionized worker versus the benefits of what's covered in these contracts?
Right, right. The difference really comes down to collective power that's backed by explicit rights written into a contract. So,
Hmm.
these contracts really set out clear and enforceable rights for workers. Those are, the foundational rights, but also, formal mechanisms to participate in the governance of technologies and the decision making. So, example, several unions have negotiated for standing committees to review specific technologies. So the professional sports leagues, for example, have wearable committees that they are negotiating and reviewing the different technologies. You also see that with the airline industry, with fairly technical systems that they have been involved in sort of the thinking behind the design and testing of those systems. And then also, really importantly, the contracts really lay out enforceable recourse when when the contract is violated, but also when the technologies cause harm, and a structured process for that to unfold for workers to participate in. Also, importantly, the contracts really outline that economic and job security protections, which are really crucial in the event of introducing technology, and also enabling workers that job security to actually have those conversations with employers and to participate. By contrast, workers who are not unionized are often basically kept in the dark about what technology their employer is using or rolling out, or they may not even know what technologies are being deployed, because many of these, as many people on this call are aware, are behind the scenes. And workers that are not unionized have a less ability to assert collective voice, and often are left to bear the economic risks individually. And
Hmm.
that is the importance for definitely underscores the importance for baseline protections in public policy for all workers, as well as really strong rights and protections for the right to organize for workers who are not already in unions.
Awesome. Great point. And I was going to ask about public policy too, so I'm glad that you talked about that. One follow-up question from the chat is, if not to put you on the spot, but if you do know with standing committees in some of these contracts, do they have, depending on the contract, is there examples of powers that go beyond just providing feedback, or are there other ways that they can exert that influence?
Right. Standing committees can vary dramatically in terms of how they're set up and the structure that they have. And some can actually make formal decisions. Some do include outside entities. Outside, they can have technical experts that are joining those committees to bring in. They can also, in the professional sports leagues, they have the ability to basically vet the vendor products. And there are also examples of unions really being part of that process of thinking through the vendors and reviewing their products for potential adoption.
Awesome. And Talia, right in time because I was going to ask if you all have questions for each other as well. So go ahead,
Well,
Talia.
I was just going to kind of piggyback on that because, right, we do have some committees in our contract. And as Lisa was saying, we weren't able to get any like promises that they would actually like make changes based on our feedback, right? However, I think what our biggest struggle was in the beginning was even getting meetings and FaceTime with our managers. And so, like,
Mhm.
it does not always fix things, but it's a chance to be like, we can show you why you should care about this because you can see that, like, I mean, our company is very interested in keeping this contract and wanting to like put our best foot forward to Google. And so, like, they have been surprised, you think, well, they don't have to do anything. The contract doesn't force them to do anything. But, if you actually have a really good case, sometimes they will listen. What we have is our managers then try to talk to Google about these problems, and it's Google that doesn't care, right? That's where we keep on getting stonewalled is like, our managers go, yes, you're absolutely right. Everything would be better if we did it this way. And then Google's like, we'll get back to you. And then it's like 6 months later and we never hear anything. So, yeah.
Hmm. That's great. No, yeah, that's really helpful
In
perspective.
many of the contracts, there's sort of a timeline where there are either it's a biannual meeting or it's a standing committee, like a monthly, here we're gonna vet and discuss the technologies. So they have addressed that in some contracts to just ensure that this is structurally embedded in how decision making is made.
Awesome. Great. And just a reminder, I see that folks have added some questions to the Q&A feature, and thank you, Talia and Varun, for already weighing in with responses to those. Folks listening, please feel free to add more questions. We will be building some of those live, so feel free to throw in any ideas or questions that you have as well. Varun, not to put you on the spot, but I know that you came in with a question for Talia. If you'd like to ask it, or I'd be happy to read it for you, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, Talia, I just wanted to ask you about like how did like fear or concerns about people's work and stuff like that come up when you were early in your organizing? I know you mentioned layoffs, so maybe that was a factor, but how did y'all like work through that? Because that's something that really comes up a lot when we're talking to our coworkers.
Oh man, I mean, every single conversation. And like also that was what I was scared of too. Yeah, and I think some people, they were like, you know what? I wish you all the best, but this isn't my thing, right? But a lot of folks, I think what we did was we really pointed out, hey, the reason that we started all of this collectively, right? Like this was something that we all voted in favor of as a majority. And that was because we felt like we were going to be laid off no matter what. Right? Like we could see the writing on the wall. They were hiring tons of people from overseas, clearly kind of building up an arsenal, of other, regions that were much cheaper than us. And it was like I didn't ever really, I don't like to tell people like, what do you have to lose? But at the same time, people just kept on expressing to me like, do you see what they're doing? It seems really obvious that they're going to try and get rid of us. And I was like, well, maybe with our union, maybe if we unionize, we can prevent some of that. It did not happen, right? Like that's not exactly how it played out. Although now that we have the contract, I would say we all feel a lot more secure, but it would have been more amazing if it could have been secure for those 120 people that we started with, of course, like that would have been the dream. But I mean, I think that's where heavy, like, you just got to be honest with people, right? Like, don't sugarcoat it, right? Like, be like, you know what? Like, absolutely, they could lay us off because we're unionizing, but don't you think they're going to lay us off without that? Like, isn't that where it looks like this is kind of all going? And again, it's just like, wouldn't you rather see? Like, let's just try. Maybe we should just see if there's something we could do to maybe mitigate it. And at the time, of course, I was also able to tell them, like, well, if something does happen, we can file an unfair labor practice, and maybe, the National Labor Regulation Board will help us out. Again, these days, you can't really tell people that because, that organization is really kind of non-functional at the moment. So that's why, again, I would say going slowly and being stealthy these days is a good idea. But, if you're not talking about like formal, unionizing though, absolutely, you can be like, well, maybe if we are able to assert ourselves a little bit more, maybe actually we can make things better that in a way that like they won't lay us off because they see that we really care about this work. Again, it just depends, like on your, some people are always going to be cynical and they're going to be like, well, no, the more we speak up, the more that it's just putting a target on our backs. But that's actually not always the case. Like sometimes when you speak up, they go, oh, actually, these people seem like they really care about what's going on and maybe we should work with them. It just depends.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
We did get a few more AI specific questions in advance. So this will be our AI portion of the Q&A section and discussion, which is so first off, there were I mean, one interesting thing about the position that you are in the tech industry is that you're maybe contributing to building AI systems and you're also impacted by it. And then those tools are then used across different industries as well. So there was a question we got in advance that was asking about how you see resistance to AI outside of inherently tech companies. What do you think of a right of refusal to use AI, or at least AI for certain tasks as part of a work agreement? And questions just about like how contract language might also be addressing AI. And then related to this, but semi-separate, is how tech workers are important in the fight against labor displacement, potential labor displacement due to AI. So curious if folks have any reactions to either of those questions.
I
Lisa,
can
go
weigh
ahead.
in on this.
Yeah.
And I wanted to actually mention this with when Varun was speaking. Um, there's a lot of in the most recent contracts in the creative industries, the News Guild, as well as in the Writers Guild and the actors. There's language in IATSE as well, the Theatrical Workers Guild. There's language that basically explicitly states that workers cannot be required to displace their other workers. So that is one piece of that where they won't be required to use a product that's going to displace either their coworkers or people in the bargaining unit. And then also that right to refusal, that is a key component, is the worker's discretion to decide to use the technology or not. So that's a key component of you can't be required to use generative AI in a lot of the News Guild contracts and the Writers Guild contracts, and then you can choose to use AI. So those are some really key components of those AI agreements.
Just wanted to jump in and note also that we will also now stop the recording so that folks should feel comfortable asking questions. If you are here live, if you want to ask a specific question, we'll make sure that's not included in